We're like in Riverside, California.
And good morning. Welcome to our council meeting that will include a consent agenda and workshop on our legislative agenda update. We'll jump right into the meeting. I'll call the meeting to order, and the first thing that we need to do is approve the minutes of the regular meeting of November 20th, 2018. Any changes or corrections needed on the meeting minutes? Seeing none, I would move that we approve those meeting minutes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Consent agenda items 1 through 21. We have in that so we have put the Board of Bids outside of that. So consent agenda items 1 through 21. Any items that need to be pulled? Seeing none, I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And motion passes unanimously. Board of Bids, can you give us a quick rundown of the contracts?
Very quick rundown. We have a paving Greenwich Road from Harry to Pawnee for Public Works and Utilities. Pearson Construction for $4,609,883.57. And that's all the bids that were received.
That's pretty simple.
Very simple.
What was the holdup of that from last week? You were
We were
trying.
waiting at KDOT approval, so for the agencies, federal funding agencies have to approve that before
Okay.
city council. So FAA approves the airport ones first, and KDOT approves, and then it was just deferred.
How much of that is KDOT funding?
80%, Gary Jansen's back there, so.
So the 80% of that 4 millions we're
KDOT
receiving from KDOT?
Correct.
Okay. Move to approve.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We don't have anything under council member agenda. Any appointments or comments to be made today? Seeing none, instead of adjourning, we do have an executive session. Let's just wait and hold the executive session after the legislative agenda update. I think that'll be easier on everyone. And so we will keep the meeting open, and at this point, pause the meeting for our workshop and turn it over to Robert Layton.
Thank you, Mayor. Today we want to review with you and workshop the proposed 2019 federal and state legislative agendas. Turn it over to Ken Evans to introduce our speakers who will go over the tentative or the recommended program.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Ken Evans, Strategic Communications Director. Well, it's that time of year again, so we're going to take a look at both agendas. These are in draft form. They remain in draft form even after you officially adopt them in December. So you will be seeing these again, and we will be communicating with you throughout the legislative sessions, whether it's DC or in Topeka. So we're going to take the state agenda first, and I have a couple people to reintroduce to you. So Kimberly is here from Genscher Swati Public Affairs, and Marley Carpenter is also on the phone. So whatever questions you have, please ask them. And if I know the answer, I will chime in, but I may not. So you often get really detailed, and that usually outstrips my what I know. So Kimberly, come on up, and Marley, I believe you're taking the first part of the agenda, correct?
Yeah, and if it's okay, I may just provide a little election preview, and then Marley will go into a few of the subjects, and then she'll kick it back to me to do a lot of the public utility matters. So as you all know, there was an election in early November, and so the Kansas legislature did become more conservative in its composition, and we also have a new governor who is a Democrat. So probably one of the biggest question marks for all of us is, how will Governor-elect Laura Kelly and Lieutenant Governor-elect Lynn Rogers work with a markedly more conservative legislature. A perfect example of that is going to be on Medicaid expansion, if you will. You have a lot of press and certainly the incoming governor say that Medicaid expansion is a top priority issue, but you have the legislature and many of those in legislative leadership that have said that their number one priority is to make sure the Medicaid expansion doesn't happen. So the question mark is going to be, how do they meet in the middle? And that will impact all of the issues, not only on our agenda, but issues that such as how do we fund the transportation, comprehensive transportation plan, to blight, to, you name the subject matter. So with that, Marley's going to go through the agenda, and then I'll take over some of the public utility matters.
continue to be a #1 priority in the state and at the legislature. The Commerce Committee, is my understanding, is going to spend a significant amount of time looking at workforce training and workforce development programs in the state as well as in Wichita. Moving to public safety, metal theft is a priority this year. Law enforcement brought this to the attention and wanted to add this to our agenda. We will be supporting new fees or new programs that will help pay for a metal theft database. There is a current metal theft database in statute, but there is not any funding for it. Moving down to body cams, the Judicial Council is looking at this issue and will make recommendations before the session. Juvenile issues is also something that we will be watching and monitoring. With the new juvenile justice reforms, there are some issues that have arisen, and we will continue to work with the legislature on that. As well as auto theft is also a priority in working with interested parties on changes to the auto theft statute. Moving on to tax and finance, at the top of everyone's mind is the property tax lid. With a more conservative legislature, we do not expect repeal of this lid, but there may be some room for some exemptions to be enacted. We'll continue to work with the league on that issue. Alternative property valuation. This is some large box retailers are wanting to have their property valued at a different rate. We will be working with the league on that issue as well. Internet sales tax collection, there was a U.S. Supreme Court that broadened the definition of nexus and allows additional sales tax to be collected. We do anticipate legislation will be introduced in the tax committees that will help us comply with the U.S. Supreme Court decision and bring additional money into the state and local governments. Looking at general government operations, several of these items are items that we have had on the agenda for past years. The federal loan program is something that the league is going to take the lead on. It is to allow local governments to participate directly in federal loans. This is in response to a Wichita EPA issue. Also, urban renewal areas. We are looking at some legislation that will help streamline the sale of property acquired within an urban renewal area. I'm going to skip Public Works and Utilities and turn it back over to Kimberly to talk about that. But I did want to talk a little bit about transportation. We do anticipate a new transportation program to come up and be discussed this legislative session. The funding is not, we're not exactly sure how that will be funded, but there are meetings, regional meetings going around the state, and there are recommendations that are going to be discussed in the next week or so in anticipation of legislation for the 2019 legislative session. In addition, bicycle safety, excuse me, bicycle safety is another priority. We are looking to work with other cities to support a statewide bike plan. And I know that there are many in the city of Wichita that are interested in that, as well as fixing an old law requiring reflector lights on bicycle pedals. With that, I will turn it back over to Kimberly to talk a little bit about Public Works and Utilities, and then be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Well, we have three key issues under the Public Works and Utilities segment, and one would be broadband deployment. And as you recall, what will be three legislative sessions ago, there was discussion about tower siting and where and how small cells could be deployed. And we will see that legislation come back this session. The large carriers have said that cities have found a way to block and impede development and deployment of small cells, so they're going to come back and look to further strengthen that law from their perspective. So we'll be very involved in that. That's also a discussion about 5G deployment. We'll also be working on this notion of this funding the state water plan. That's been a top priority of ours, but making sure that it's not being done on the backs of those residential customers. So of course there is that push-pull between the 85% of water use occurring in the rural areas versus the bulk of the payment coming from the urban areas. So we're going to continue to try and get the water plan funded while ensuring that any new fees to fund the water plan would not come on our backs. And then there is the discussion about the possible legislation surrounding the state-managed groundwater cleanup. There was some articles this summer from the Wichita Eagle related to the dry cleaning chemicals and notification with KDH&E. So we'll watch to see if anything comes about as a result of that. To that end, going back to the election just briefly, we'll also have leadership elections in both the House, and there's possibly going to be a Senate shakeup as well, not only with the committee structures themselves, but certainly with potential chairs. In the House, there will be new committees created, some committees collapsed, and all new committee members. So it'll be very interesting to see how a lot of these issues are impacted and who will be the chairs of those committees that we watch day in and day out. But another issue that is important to us is as the new administration is coming in, what does that cabinet look like? And those downfield appointments, such as an issue that is important to us is the water office. We work a great deal with the Kansas Water Office, and Tracy Streeter, as we know, is retiring. And so Governor Kelly will have the ability to appoint the new head of the water office, as well as the chief engineer, who has announced his retirement in the next 6 months or so. So lots of changes that will come as a result of new administration and some retirements. But with that, Marley and I are more than happy to stand for any questions that any of you might have.
On the first page, did we eliminate export promotion, or did
No, I just skipped over it. It
Okay.
is the same as it has been the last few years. It is still a priority, and it's still on the agenda, but there is nothing new this year that we added.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? So I think it's a good agenda. Obviously, there's multiple areas that we need to be cautious of, and we have a good team that's going to be helping us navigate through this process this year. So I don't see any need to vary too much from this agenda. I mean, we've always kept it fairly flexible for any last-minute issues that might come up, but this looks both manageable and important to our constituents. So you want to move on to the federal agenda?
Sure.
Anything else to cover on the local?
Real quick, I just wanted to mention that we've shared these drafts with our partners. So we've shared it with the Greater Wichita Partnership, REAP, Sedgwick County Association of Cities, Chamber, the Regional Chamber, various other groups, Wichita State. So they have seen this draft as well, and we've given them an opportunity to weigh in and tell us what they'd like to see. Okay.
Marley, thank you for not coming in and infecting everyone like the vice mayor's done for the last 2 weeks.
I will be there on Friday for the legislative, for when the legislators come, and so I am very hopeful I will be 100% better by then.
Very good. Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you very much.
So, real quick, what's our timeline and process next? Where do we go from here with this draft?
I think we would like to make changes before, if any changes need to be made before the meeting on Friday with the South Central Kansas delegation. We'd like to hear from you, and happy to make any changes you'd like to see.
I would just like some more information on the Kansas Reinvestment Act, because that is new from
Okay.
last year's
It is.
agenda, and I don't know anything about it.
Okay?
And then, any idea who's introducing the metal theft legislation?
I don't know. Kimberly does.
Sorry, I should have asked you while you were up there.
No, and my apologies for not going into that issue further. I was just being cognizant of time. So the metal theft question, Senator Karen Tyson has been interested in moving forward with metal theft legislation as a way to potentially fund the database. There has been talk about some private companies putting forth the money to fund the database. I'm not sure how much traction that's getting.
As donations or as required?
as donations.
Okay.
So this metal theft issue, I know it's an issue that we care a great deal about in the city of Wichita. I have been working on this issue because of utility matters for more than 11 years, and there's just always something. And so I know that it's going to be an issue that comes about this session. It's important to Karen Tyson, but I think probably from a perspective that's different than ours. I don't necessarily know that they're interested in moving forward with funding the database the way that any of us would like to have the database funded. I think that they're talking about lessening restrictions on the metal theft dealers. So this is a very evolving issue, and the entity that took the lead on it the last 2 legislative sessions, which was the Kansas Electric Cooperatives, they are not in a leadership role on this matter going forward. So I think some of the train is going to be driven by Senator Karen Tyson, and I think Cox Communication has also really stepped up, and they're the ones that have put forward this notion of the private businesses paying the fees. Okay. So this is an evolving issue, but it is one that we're going to work on in probably a variety of different ways this session.
Thank you.
Kimberly, I follow up on that. So according to my discussions with Mark Bennett, our district attorney, and the sheriff, don't they want to just duplicate a database just like they do when we did the meth lab stuff, when people go buy whatever, the Sudafed?
Yes.
Isn't it just a similar, that's monitoring a database just like that, isn't it? Right?
That is the intent, absolutely.
And is that just a big financial hurdle or something? Or
the upfront cost, I believe, is around, I have heard, around $300,000, and then they're talking about the need for...
That's 2 thefts around here.
Yeah.
Right. And the money would come from the state, and so the state has not yet allocated that money. And
so how's that database funded?
I will find that out for you.
I mean, if it's an extra $1 on every Sudafed package.
Right. I will find that out.
Okay.
And it also does come with 2 full-time employees, has been the fiscal note in the past for maintaining this database, and that's not been something the state was capable of moving forward with in previous sessions. That number may change.
To me, it's encouraging if it's just a financial obstacle, but if it's a political obstacle, then maybe we need a different battle to help overcome that. So. And
our DA has been very involved in this subject. He headed the Judicial Council on this issue. So, I mean, it has been top of mind in the minds of many leaders statewide for a decade. And we're still stuck.
Okay. Yeah, for far too long, it's been Wichita trying to solve the metal theft issue by ourselves, and that's not going to happen. And you know, they can get out of the territory, and it's almost impossible to then trace that. And so getting on the same page statewide certainly is going to be very helpful.
Yes.
If I remember, though, we did have some success before the state preempted us. And so, you know, you're right, Mayor, in terms of it being more of a regional issue, but we still saw a drop in metal thefts after the council adopted its program and ordinance. And you know, frankly, I'd be happy even just to go back to that, because I think we could be more responsive to our building community and property owners.
Well, hopefully we can run down that funding issue and maybe help with that. Anything else? Thank you.
I also neglected to thank you all for everything you did with us and for us in this year's legislative session. It made a big difference in stopping the changes on star bonds and on getting the Wichita license plate bill passed. We had a lot of good cooperation from you all, and we appreciate it very much.
Certainly, Wichita benefited last year from the actions from our team and council members that had gone up to Topeka to help on a variety of issues. And star bonds obviously were critical to the success of what we're trying to do in the core of the city. So, thank you.
Any other state questions before we
I don't think so. I think we're ready to move on.
Okay. Jim Davenport, if you're still on the line, I think all the members of council know you and just wanted to introduce you. Jim works for Thorn Partners and Thorn Run Partners now, and we've stayed with him because he's represented us very well. And just wanted to introduce Jim to run through and hit the highlights of the federal agenda.
Great. I am still here. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, everyone. I'll just give you just a brief, quick overview. As everybody knows, there was an election, a significant election here in Washington as well. Democrats at this point have picked up 38 seats in the House, so they are now going to be in charge come January. So we're going to be looking at some ways they will be looking at some ways to find common ground with the president. The Senate will remain in the hands of the Republicans. At this point, there's 2 Republican pickups. But the Democrats in the House will be looking to seek some common ground with the president on a couple of things that could be beneficial to Wichita. The first thing is infrastructure. Obviously, the president ran on a platform of beefing up the country's infrastructure. That has not materialized as of yet for the first 2 years of the administration, but the Democrats have always been interested in promoting infrastructure. The big concern will be how does it get funded, and that will be one of the impediments, I think, to moving forward an infrastructure bill, but there certainly is interest in doing that. Second item that's been talked about quite a bit over the last couple of months, and last year as well with the Republicans in charge of the House, is returning to using earmarks. Earmarks gives us another tool in the toolbox to go after some projects of yours that would not neatly fit into a competitive grant program. It also gives us other paths to funding for some of these projects where we may have been stymied in the past couple of years. Another matter that could get taken up is that there might be some sort of tax legislation. The House Democrats were not too enamored with the House tax package that passed last year. They may want to look for some tweaks to that, and that might give us some opportunity to roll back some of the items that were of concern to the city last time around. So, having said that, let's go through your projects here, and I'll just talk a little bit about where we're at and where I hope we're going. The Wichita North Junction project, I did see that the governor has committed some funding to that project in the future. I think that's terrific. The city has a build grant application in right now. The build grants for 2018 they originally announced they would be awarded in December. I am going to be at DOT tomorrow in front of the build grant folks, so I will ask if they are still on target for that, and that will give me an opportunity to weigh in just for a moment on your build grant. Your 2 senators have sent letters of support, as did your congressman. If we don't make it this year with the build grant, we certainly will go after it again. There will be funding for build in 2019. And I think the fact that the governor is committing funding to the project will be noteworthy to DOT, and that it's showing a state commitment to that large project. Second item is the Amtrak extension. We will continue to plug away at that. Councilman Meitzner has been extremely helpful in navigating the local politics in that, as well as that of KDOT, and we'll continue to work with the city to work that project and talk with Amtrak. With a big infrastructure package, if there is one, there's certainly a potential for Amtrak to get some significant funding, and that could certainly help us out.
Jim, I think Councilman Meitzner has a question.
Hey, Jim.
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Yep.
Always good to talk to you. Sometime later today, or for sure this week, I need to catch up with you, and a council member, Cindy Claycomb, is pretty involved in this now as well. And
okay.
There's some recent moving pieces that we need to get on the same page with.
Okay, great. Yep, happy to do it. The third item is Equus Beds project. We were able to help the city, and you all did a fantastic job of getting your feasibility study together to allow you to proceed with a Water Smart grant, which is a Title 16 grant program through the Bureau of Reclamation. So you've applied for that. We're waiting on a decision on that. So we will continue to pursue the Water Smart competitive grant process, as well as looking to get Equisbeds reauthorized through legislation that's been offered by your congressional delegation. If earmarks are allowed, it will smooth the path for reauthorization, because one of the challenges in the House has been the feeling by the House Resources Committee that this reauthorization is tantamount to an earmark. I disagree with that, but that's their position. So if earmarks are allowed, we might have an easier time. If earmarks are allowed and you are reauthorized, we will also be able to pursue direct funding in the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill annually for this project. So that would open up that opportunity. As far as your Water Smart grant, your senators and congressmen also sent letters of support on that. We should hopefully know the results of that sometime here soon. The next item is municipal taxes. We've got that advanced refunding bonds issue on there, which, as I said earlier, if there is some sort of tax legislation, we could look to reinstate that provision, but we just don't know if Democrats are going to pursue a tax bill right now. The next item is the preemption of local fees for next-gen wireless. That issue right now is going to be mired in litigation. Several cities have filed suits against the FCC's declaratory ruling, and telecom companies have filed suits as well. We don't know what circuit court that's going to end up in, but for now, I don't think we're going to see any legislation on it. The declaratory ruling is where it stands, but there could be some changes to that ruling depending on the litigation. So I will continue to keep you apprised of that. Economic development is sort of a general topic we've left on there. We'll continue to look at any opportunities that we think will benefit Wichita, whether it's through EDA or any of the other federal agencies. So that's kind of a catch-all there. The energy and environment area, I'll kind of skip over that for now. I think that's also a monitoring item. Page 10 is waters of the U.S. That right now is also mired in litigation. There was a 2015, there was a recent ruling that implemented waters of the U.S., the 2015 rule in 26 states. So some states are dealing with the rule and some aren't. Kansas is not one of them, which is actually good for you all. So maybe it's a benefit that this stays in litigation for a while for the city. The last section is the funding for city services, and I'll talk just a little bit about how earmarks would play into this. This is sort of a general section of, these are like all the programs that formula funding or competitive grants are derived from, and most of these would be in some way beneficial to the city or one of its departments. Now, if earmarks return, several of these programs get earmarked. So what that means is your congressman will submit a project request for, let's just say, $1 million for the city of Wichita for, I'll go back to one of the old ones. There used to be a category called Economic Development Initiatives under HUD. And, he could seek a project for the city under one of these programs. If earmarks get reinstated, I will be coming back to you sometime, well, as soon as I hear about it, quite frankly, to look at not only the projects we have here, but if there's a few others that you might have out there, some infrastructure projects that we're not talking about, where we can submit a project request. And I will do all the submissions on that end, but basically the information I need is a one-pager on a project with the funding amount and the need and matching amounts and so forth. So earmarks return, it could open up some opportunities in this last section of the agenda. Again, like the mayor said, we're always flexible with your agenda. As things come up, we can change this. Happy to take any of your recommendations or additions. And Ken, you mentioned that you've shared the agenda with the city's partners, and we'd certainly, if they're sharing the agendas with you, I'd be happy to take a look at their stuff as well. So having said that, I'm here for any questions.
Yeah, Councilmember Meister.
So Jim, thanks for, again, this is Pete. Your page 11, 12, 13, are these all just examples and categories of previous the earmark world?
Yeah, so these are not all of them. Some are and some aren't. They are categories that are in existence each year where funds are provided for local governments. Several of these are strictly competitive grants and formula funding. Some of them, though, do get earmarked.
Okay.
And what's difficult to tell at this point is if they do allow earmarks, are they going to allow it in the same areas, in the same categories that they did prior to the moratorium? And that we don't know at this point. So there could be new programs available, and old ones that were there may not be there anymore. And I just don't know at this point.
Okay. Thank you. It's a good summary.
Yeah.
Under the broad category of economic development, I would encourage us to just monitor opportunity zones. I think this administration is pretty fond of them. I don't see a lot of change, but potentially there could be some minor changes in the way that opportunity zones are implemented. And so I would just encourage us to monitor that.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, we are monitoring that as well. My colleague participated on a call with Treasury on that last week. I may have some information I could forward to Ken.
Any other questions about the federal agenda? Yes, Councilmember Claycomb.
Thank you. I just have a comment, really. So on this funding for city services, there are a lot of areas in here that have to do with drug treatment and substance abuse and mental health, and I think that it becomes vitally important for us to watch for those. The manager and I have talked about those a little bit in terms of some of the problems that this creates in terms of homelessness and things like that. So glad to see all of these possibly available to us. So,
yeah, and there's been a lot, Councilwoman, on opioid treatment and prevention and so forth. My new firm here actually specializes in health. That's where they started. There are some smart people here, a lot smarter than I, on health that monitor this stuff. They provide it to me, and I flip it to the city for your interest. If there are specific things, though, you would like us to look into that aren't here, please let us know, and I can get our staff on those topics.
thanks, Jim.
Yep.
Anything else? Jim, thank you. We appreciate the work you've been doing on behalf of the city of Wichita, and looking forward to another really good year.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you all again for the efforts you make in D.C.
Thank you, Ken. And I say, just while I've got you, I assume you'll be coming out for the National League of Cities again?
Yeah, the plan is to still come out and get an opportunity to visit with our legislatures and our federal folks. And so we haven't set those plans up in concrete yet, but we'll be figuring out who's going and the timeline.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, anything else on the workshop?
That's it, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Ken, we appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Doing a fine job for a young man. So we will resume our council meeting, and we have the need to go into executive session to cover a couple of items, property acquisition and some next settlements, and so I move that the City Council recess into executive session, and we'll say for 10 minutes for one item and 5 minutes for the other, so a total of 15 minutes. And that we move into the executive session for a total of 15 minutes to receive information regarding acquisition of property pursuant to KSA 75-4319 for the preliminary discussion of acquisition of real property, and then also the executive session for 5 minutes to review an offer of settlement pursuant to KSA 75-4319 for legal consultation with city attorney, which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship for legal advice and claim settlement, and that this session is required to protect the city's right to the confidentiality of negotiating positions and the public interest, along with the protect attorney-client privilege and public interest, and to protect the city's right to confidentiality of its negotiation positions and the public interest. And we will return back in, and we'll hold the executive session in this room and return back to open session no earlier than, we'll say, 10:25.
Second. I was waiting for you to be done.
I know. Attorneys like it when I read everything. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. We'll clear the room and go into executive session.